In 1925, a man named Henry Bliss became the first person in American history to be killed by an automobile. Wait, that's not quite right. That happened in 1899. The point is this: by 1925, it had become so common that cities stopped counting individual names. They only counted numbers. And the number for 1925 was 15,000 Americans killed on city streets in a single year. None of them were doing anything illegal. They were crossing the street. For most of human history, the street was shared space. Pedestrians, horses, carts, vendors, everyone moved through the same surface, at roughly the same speed, negotiating right-of-way by eye contact and instinct. Nobody owned the street. Nobody had exclusive claim to it. Then the automobile arrived, and for the first 2 decades, cars simply joined the chaos. They were faster than everything else, which made them more dangerous than everything else. But legally, they had no more right to the road than a child chasing a ball. That arrangement was intolerable to the automobile industry. A car that had to slow down for pedestrians was a car that couldn't sell its core promise: speed. So they did something that had never been done before in the history of transportation. They didn't build a better car. They changed who owned the street, and they did it by making pedestrians criminals. The word jaywalker did not exist before 1910. Jay was a rural slang term, a hick, a country bumpkin, someone who didn't know how cities worked. A jaywalker was literally a country person walking stupidly through an urban street, unaware of how traffic was supposed to move. The term was invented and deployed by automobile industry advocates as a deliberate insult. The goal was not to describe behavior. The goal was to create shame. Before this campaign, it was completely normal, legally and socially, to cross a street anywhere, at any point, in any direction. The street was public space. Crossing it was not an act that required permission. The campaign to criminalize pedestrian behavior was one of the most successful lobbying efforts in American history. The National Automobile Chamber of Commerce, the industry trade group, organized letter-writing campaigns, worked with city newspapers, and pressured local governments to pass ordinances restricting where pedestrians could legally walk. By the 1920s, dozens of American cities had passed jaywalking laws. By 1930, the term had entered standard American English as a neutral descriptor, stripped of its origin as an industry insult and accepted as common sense. The automobile industry had successfully reframed a public street as, by default, automobile territory. Pedestrians were now guests on their own infrastructure. But here's what the industry couldn't control. The death toll kept rising. And eventually, the deaths became politically impossible to ignore. Cities knew pedestrians were dying. The solution they reached for first was the obvious one: mark where pedestrians should cross and hope drivers would stop. The earliest crosswalk markings in the United States date to the 1910s. Simple painted lines, sometimes just 2 parallel stripes across a road intersection. No legal weight, no enforcement mechanism, just paint on asphalt, signaling that a human being might be attempting to cross here. It did almost nothing. The fundamental problem was not that pedestrians were crossing in the wrong places. The problem was that cars did not stop for them, even in the right places. A painted line on the road had no legal meaning for a driver, unless a specific law existed requiring them to yield. And in most American cities through the 1930s and 40s, no such law consistently existed or was enforced. The crosswalk, in its first form, was infrastructure theater. It looked like a solution. It made city planners feel like they had addressed the problem. It gave newspapers something to photograph. But a pedestrian standing in a painted box in 1930 had no more legal protection than one standing anywhere else on the street. What changed everything wasn't American at all. It came from a country that had lost so many people in the Second World War that it had developed a particular obsession with preventing unnecessary death. In 1951, the British government introduced a new type of pedestrian crossing on a road in Slough, a town west of London. It was called the zebra crossing. The design was specific, alternating black and white stripes running the full width of the road, flanked on both sides by Belisha beacons. Orange globes mounted on black and white striped poles, named after Leslie Hora Belisha, the transport minister who had introduced an earlier version in 1934. What made the zebra crossing different from American painted lines was not the design. It was the law attached to it. In Britain, stopping for a pedestrian at a zebra crossing was not optional. It was a criminal offense not to. Drivers who failed to yield faced fines and license penalties. The crossing was not a suggestion. It was a legal transfer of right-of-way, enforced by the state. The results were measurable within years. Pedestrian fatalities at marked crossings in Britain dropped significantly through the 1950s. The zebra crossing worked not because the stripes were wider or the paint was better, but because it came with legal consequences for drivers who ignored it. America was watching, but America had a problem. Britain didn't. An automobile industry with direct influence over traffic law. The push to give pedestrians legal right-of-way at crosswalks in the United States was not a public safety campaign. It was a political fight that took decades. The automobile industry's position was straightforward. Pedestrians who used marked crossings were already being accommodated. What they opposed was any law that created automatic liability for drivers when a pedestrian was struck in a crosswalk. The argument being that pedestrians could walk out unpredictably and that drivers shouldn't be automatically responsible. This argument had real traction because it contained a grain of truth, but it also conveniently protected the industry from the legal consequences of a traffic culture it had spent 30 years creating. State by state, through the 1940s and 50s, yield laws began to pass, some requiring drivers to stop for pedestrians already in the crosswalk, others requiring stops for pedestrians waiting at the curb. The specifics varied wildly. California's law was different from New York's. New York's was different from Texas's. The fragmentation was not accidental. A patchwork of inconsistent laws was nearly impossible for pedestrians to navigate and nearly impossible to enforce. A driver crossing state lines could claim genuine confusion about the rules, and often be right. The federal government did not establish a uniform national standard for pedestrian right-of-way at crosswalks. It still hasn't. To this day, pedestrian crossing law in the United States is determined at the state level, which means that the legal protection a person has when stepping into a crosswalk in New York City is different from what they have in Nashville, Tennessee. The crosswalk was standardized in shape long before it was standardized in meaning. What did get standardized was the appearance. In 1971, the Federal Highway Administration published the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the MUTCD, which specified, among thousands of other things, exactly what a crosswalk should look like. 2 parallel white lines, each at least 6 inches wide, spanning the full width of the crossing. That was the standard. The zebra pattern, the British version with full stripes, was acknowledged but not required. American crosswalks would be defined by their edges, not their interior. The MUTCD also specified where crosswalks should be marked: at intersections with traffic signals, at mid-block locations with sufficient pedestrian volume, and at any location where pedestrian safety warranted a marked path. What it could not specify was enforcement. The MUTCD could tell a city how to paint a crosswalk. It could not tell a police officer to ticket a driver who rolled through one without stopping. That remained a local political decision. This is why, in American cities today, the crosswalk exists in a strange legal limbo. It is officially marked, officially recognized, and officially accorded legal protection. But the level of enforcement of that protection varies so widely that in practice, the crosswalk functions in many places less as a legal right and more as a social negotiation between a pedestrian and a driver. The paint says you have the right of way. The driver decides whether to agree. In 2022, 7,522 pedestrians were killed in traffic crashes in the United States. That is the highest number recorded since 1981. 40 years of pedestrian safety progress, reversed in roughly a decade. The increase is not random. Research points to three converging factors: larger vehicles, SUVs and pickup trucks, with higher front profiles that strike pedestrians in the torso rather than the legs, distracted driving, and a collapse in pedestrian infrastructure investment in the decades following the 1970s highway boom. But there is a fourth factor that gets less attention: the legal ambiguity that was baked into American crosswalk law from the beginning and was never fully resolved. Studies by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety found that drivers yielded to pedestrians at marked crosswalks in American cities at rates as low as 27% in some locations, meaning that in certain American cities, the expectation upon entering a marked crosswalk, a space with explicit legal protection, is that fewer than 1 in 3 drivers will stop. In the United Kingdom, compliance rates at zebra crossings consistently exceed 95%. The difference is not cultural, it is legal. British drivers stop because they face real consequences for not stopping. American drivers make individual calculations. The crosswalk is the same width on both sides of the Atlantic. The paint is the same color, but one of them functions as infrastructure and the other, in too many places, functions as a suggestion. The crosswalk was invented in its modern form to give pedestrians back something that had been taken from them: the right to use a public street safely. The original street required no crosswalk because it belonged to everyone. Then the automobile industry spent 30 years reframing the street as car territory and invented a legal concept, jaywalking, to make pedestrian movement into an act of transgression. Then cities painted lines on the road and called it safety infrastructure. Then governments passed laws giving those lines legal weight. Inconsistently, incompletely, at different rates in different states. The result is a piece of infrastructure that is simultaneously everywhere and unreliable, that carries the full symbolism of pedestrian rights, while providing those rights inconsistently. And that has been the subject of continuous reform efforts for over a century without being fundamentally resolved. Here is the final irony. The crosswalk is one of the most expensive things a city paints on its streets. Thermoplastic marking, proper signage, signal timing, and accessibility features can cost tens of thousands of dollars per intersection. And in many American cities, the most important variable determining whether that infrastructure actually protects anyone is still whether the driver at that moment chooses to stop. The word Jaywalker was invented in 1910 to shame pedestrians into accepting that the street wasn't theirs. In most American cities, the argument is still ongoing.